initiative is designed to support mother-baby bonding and optimal infant feeding practices by upholding the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding. San Juan Regional Medical Center, officially baby-friendly and serving the Four Corners since 1910. Find out more online at sanjuanregional.com. "11 minutes past 8 o'clock, Monday morning, October the 7th. Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Micklin, and thank you for tuning in to KSJE 90.9 FM here in San Juan County, New Mexico, 103.3 FM in Durango, Colorado. And, of course, you can listen worldwide by going to our website, KSJE.com. Good morning also to our visual radio viewers who are watching the program streaming live today to the KSJE YouTube channel and our Facebook page. We're glad that you are with us as well, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Coming up in the next few moments, we are continuing our series on Mondays during what this is, Hispanic Heritage Month. And today our topic is immigrant businesses in New Mexico and the United States. I'll be joined with a business attorney from the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center in Albuquerque to talk a little bit about the contributions made to our state and to our country. That is coming up in the next few moments right here on KSJE. So we hope you'll stay tuned and join us for the conversation right here. And then, of course, we will talk technology with Lewis Campbell at about 8:50 a.m. today. Lewis will be joining me from Synergy Computer Systems, talking about some of the technology stories in the news this week. So stay tuned for that. Then, of course, at 9 a.m., it's BBC News, followed by Roving with the Arts at 9:06. Mikes will be here. He's playing music for us from Mozart this morning. It's Mozart Serenade number 10 coming up on the program, along with some arts news for us and some other happenings around the area. That's coming up today at 9:06 on KSJE. We invite you to join us on social media, of course. Connect with us on your platform of choice. Follow us on Facebook, of course. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can like us on Twitter and check out KSJE on Instagram as well. Weather forecast, much cooler weather in store for us this week. Still lots of sunshine, though, so that's good. 74 for a high today in Farmington. Clear and 41 tonight. It'll be a bit warmer tomorrow with a high of 76. 76 again on Wednesday, but then things get markedly cooler with a high of only 54 on Thursday, 53 on Friday, lower 60s on Saturday. And take a look at the overnight lows. That may need some attention in your garden because the low this week on Thursday should get down to about 23 degrees and 22 on Friday night, 25 on Saturday. That sounds like a hard freeze to me, but I will double check with our agriculture experts before I pass that along with Definity. But it's definitely much colder, so be aware of that. We'll take you to our weather picture this morning, which is up north in Durango. As the colors are turning, certainly. Here's a view from DurangoLiveCam.com for our viewers who are watching the screen this morning. You can see the trees, of course, changing in downtown Durango. The train getting ready to take off from a few moments ago. And that is a look at Main Avenue, of course, near the train station. The Great Strader Hotel visible there in that picture. And that is a look at the fall colors this morning in Durango, Colorado. Joining me with our visual radio technology to talk a little bit about immigration and business in New Mexico and in the United States from the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center in Albuquerque via Skype this morning. Jazmin Jirazoqui-Ruiz is joining me today. And Jazmin, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
You bet. And you've been doing this kind of work now for how long, would you say?
A little bit over 2 years.
Okay. And so talk to me a little bit about what we mean when we say immigrants and business law and what this means, because I think a lot of folks don't quite always hear about that and that connection to maybe the immigrants who are here in our state and in our communities and what this may mean for economic development and things along that line. So maybe try to make it a bit clearer to our audience this morning.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually really important when you're talking about context. I often get individuals who wonder what immigration law has anything to do with business and tax, and it's actually a large part of being an immigrant. And I think to talk about that, we have to talk about bigger numbers.
Okay.
We have close to 200,000 immigrants in New Mexico, so that's about 9% of our population. And there's this common misconception that immigrants are not contributing to our economy, or under the current federal narrative that they are living off the government. But immigrants actually strengthen our economy, and particularly here in New Mexico, they contribute over $3.4 billion in spending power. And when we're talking about taxes, we're talking over 7 million in federal taxes, and I'm sorry, 7 billion in federal taxes and over 3 billion, close to 4 billion in state taxes. So I think that just gives individuals a perspective in how much immigrants actually contribute to our economy, but also the number of immigrants who start businesses here is substantially larger statistically than those who are U.S. born. And to give you a little bit of an idea, immigrant entrepreneurs in New Mexico represent more than 1 in 7 businesses owned in our state.
Wow.
And a lot of the statistics that I'm giving you is from research about immigrants in New Mexico, which can be found on the American Immigration Council website.
Okay, I was going to ask you for the sources for that information, because it is fascinating. And when we talk taxes, I mean, are you talking gross receipts taxes? Are you talking income taxes? I mean, what types of taxes are we talking about?
I'm talking about all taxes. This is general information. So we're talking about federal and state income taxes, but in terms of gross receipts taxes, that research is actually something that we're looking into with the work that I'm doing. I guess for additional information, this type of work is pretty new in terms of helping on the legal side. My work came out of a postgraduate fellowship project that I proposed when I graduated from law school, and the fellowship actually just ended, but the work continues here at the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center.
Interesting. Okay. And we do often hear that immigrants do drain resources or use resources, or they get all these benefits, and I've never seen that any source or anything that is legitimate that would explain how that's supposed to work. But what you're saying is that they really don't, and they actually contribute to economic development and economic prosperity in the communities where they settle, correct?
That's correct. And so, I mean, it's just important to think about the different types of immigration statuses that exist and how that affects the economic power of families. And so there's also this misconception that if you're an undocumented immigrant, they don't pay into taxes, and that's actually not true. Although there are immigration laws that state that if you don't have employment authorization, an employer should not hire you, there's a lot of research to show that immigrants, regardless of whether they have status, pay into taxes. And so immigrants who aren't eligible for a Social Security number do that through what's colloquially called an ITIN, which is an independent taxpayer identification number, which laws changed in 2015, and now they have to be renewed. So we're seeing a lot of immigrants who are in this hysteria of, I need to renew my ITIN because I need to pay my taxes and I need to be in line with the law. And so I think that's really interesting from the perspective that when we're helping our clients, because based off of the narrative that we see now, that's not something that's talked about.
Right. And this goes back to the federal immigration laws and things that, and we talked a little bit about this last week with Adriel, how things haven't been updated really in 20, 30 years. And so is that kind of where we're coming from with this as well, these outdated or at least not updated federal laws on immigration and status and things like that?
Well, I mean, that's the thing though, right? That's always the question that I get, especially I've actually had to educate a lot of attorneys here in our state and who work for our state government. There's There is large confusion between federal immigration law and business law and tax law, which they're not, sometimes these systems don't talk to each other. So I have business owners, some have status, some are naturalized U.S. citizens, some are legal permanent residents, others are undocumented, or others have some kind of humanitarian visa where they have an employment document, but they're seeking entrepreneurship routes. And so it's really interesting to see how all of those play together, and the limited understanding of the intersectionality of all these areas of law exist even within attorneys. So I can only imagine how confusing that is for the general public and the current narrative that we see through current media.
Right. Well, sure. And if I'm a business owner and I'm just trying to hire people to do my job and make the widgets or whatever it is that I'm in business to do, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing everything properly and dotting the I's and crossing the T's, it's got to be somewhat of a difficulty to make sure I am doing everything properly. Isn't that true?
Yeah, and so I mean, even as a native-born U.S. citizen who speaks the language, I see those entrepreneurs have difficulties and reach out to various organizations that help you start businesses. Can you imagine the difficulty for individuals who are from another country where the law and the tax system is completely different, and then on top of that you add that they don't know the language? So I think programs like the one that we have here are really important, because we not only address the business and tax issues, but we also look at it through a lens in which we're trying to understand the limitations that the individual may have based off of their immigration status. And then things can get a little bit more complicated when you're talking about incorporating or becoming an LLC, or one of the things that's become very popular is a cooperative structure, and how immigration status of the various owners who want to be in the cooperative can affect that too.
Right.
It's really interesting, and it's really exciting to be working on this during this time.
Right. Interesting. And is there any difference necessarily from what you see with your clients maybe in Albuquerque and more of the metro areas than in the other rural parts of the state? Are there certain issues that businesses face or business owners face or immigrants face in the different areas of our state?
Yeah, so one of the things, even though in Albuquerque there are more resources, there's still a disparity in understanding the fact that someone who is undocumented can have their own business, that they can do that with their I-10, and understanding how the tax law works with that. But what I see the most in rural areas of New Mexico is the impact of the lack of resources. So we run into individuals who, because of the heightened enforcement, especially down south, there is a huge fear of interacting with, attorneys, but also the different agencies that they should be interacting with when trying to focus on entrepreneurial endeavors. And so an example would be trying to reach out to the New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department because of the implementation of the Real ID and the confusion as to whether their ID will allow them to go into the NMTRD, and having to explain that the TRD is a state agency and they should be going in there, but because of the fear, they don't. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it is we have found that there are individuals who have been living here, have been working, have been contributing to the economy, have been informally acting as business owners, but have never interacted with agencies like the IRS out of fear because of the heightened enforcement that they live in, because that's their reality down south. And the same thing we see up north. There are individuals who don't know that they can use an I-10 to start their businesses if they're undocumented, and oftentimes they don't know where to reach out to just because these institutions aren't directly targeting them as the customers that should be coming to be able to get access to these resources.
Interesting. And so for these people, these immigrants that want to invest in their communities and maybe start a business or add to the economic diversity of our state, do they do that? But with are they always kind of looking over their shoulder because they may be undocumented or things along that line? I mean, they really don't have any guarantees, right? That that they're going to be able to stay with their business even if it's successful, and they're providing tax base and things like that and employment for neighbors in their community?
Yeah, so that's really interesting because that's actually a question that comes up often is why would someone want to start a business if they have no guarantee that they'll stay? Well, there are actually procedures in immigration court where if you show that you have, and Adriel probably explained a lot of this, if you have roots here in the U.S., if you've been living here for a certain amount of time, if you have been working here, if you have U.S. citizen children and a spouse, one of the things that has been found to be a positive finding in these types of removal cases is being a business owner and showing that you've been paying taxes and showing that you've been contributing to the economy, which is why there's such a huge overlap in entrepreneurship and tax and business law. One of the things that we're moving towards is how do we incorporate a safety plan for these immigrant entrepreneurs, right? Because that's always a fear. What happens if I am detained and I am removed from the country? There has to be a plan in place of how you can still access the economic power that you have here from another country. But of course, the goal is always to maintain safety here as well.
Right. But there's really no guarantees, is there not? I mean, in this current environment, I mean, anything can happen and does sometimes?
Yeah, which is why these plans are so important. And I think people understand that, right? Any person who comes here undocumented or they overstay their visa, they're taking a risk. And so I think that's why we see such a large percentage of immigrants, whether they're college educated or not, going into entrepreneurial endeavors is because they're used to risk. And so the alternative is working a low-wage job in conditions where you're abused and you experience wage theft, as opposed to opening a business. And I mean, to be clear, on top of opening a business and having economic sustainability for the individual families, these immigrant-owned businesses also generate jobs, and they generate millions to, depending on what state you're talking about, to billions of dollars in income and payroll for their employees too. So these immigrant owners are taking a risk and they know that, but at the end of the day, the economic sustainability of their families is worth it to them. And so that's why these plans are starting to become important. And what do you do because you are at that risk, especially under the current administration? Right.
And so for these individuals, if they are undocumented, is there a path to citizenship, or is it just kind of waiting until the issue gets kind of forced on them, I guess, through some other incident or what have you, or another enforcement option?
Yeah, so the thing is that the only avenues for a pathway to citizenship are the avenues that exist, that Adriel probably talked about, you know, like family-based immigration, humanitarian-based relief, or there is this thing where people are like, oh, if I'm a business owner, am I eligible for an investor visa? Am I eligible for an employer to petition for me? And that can get really tricky, because if you've already accrued unlawful presence in the United States, those are relief. That's a type of relief that's no longer available to you. So when we're talking about undocumented individuals who are starting their own businesses here, there is no such thing as them getting in line and paying for a visa or paying for their citizenship. At that point, they're at the mercy of whatever immigration relief currently exists under law.
I see. And is there a lot of discretion, I guess, with some of these enforcement personnel to enforce some of these things, or are we finding there's less discretion these days than maybe there was a few years ago?
Yeah, so the increased enforcement is now, it's a pendulum, right? And under the current federal administration that we live in, we are seeing that the discretion, right, they have discretion, whether they will,
they do.
Whether it would be a positive discretion and with regard to the immigrant, or whether it'll be according to the policy of the federal immigration, the federal administration that we're under. And so we're seeing more and more that officers are using their discretion against the immigrants who they are dealing with. And so right now is a time when we're telling our clients, don't put yourself at risk, because chances are that you will not experience a positive exercise of discretion in your case.
I see. And so again, the only option then, I guess, is the things that you talked about before. We've talked a little bit about, having a family connection or other things like that, or to become a naturalized citizen. Is that then, especially if you're undocumented, that would take that stress off of you by becoming a citizen?
Yeah, but the thing is it's not as easy as saying, right, like that's the thing about immigration law. It's so confusing that there are people who genuinely think, well, why don't you just pay an immigration attorney for you to become a citizen, right? There are even people who think you don't become a citizen because you don't want to pay taxes, which, like we discussed earlier, isn't true. But if you are undocumented, unless you have a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident family member, obtaining a visa or a green card, most commonly called, to immigrate to the U.S. and then become a citizen is difficult, right? If you don't have anyone in your family who has status who can petition for you to immigrate to the U.S., then your other options are a humanitarian visa, which are limited in number. You need an immigration attorney to help you because they can be very cumbersome and complicated, and then on top of that you add the barrier of poverty, and it's even more difficult to access that. So even obtaining any kind of visa is the first step, and then from that you can try to become a citizen, but even that can also be complicated.
I see. Interesting. I'm talking to Jazmin Jirazoqui-Ruiz. She is an attorney with the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, and they're speaking to us from Albuquerque today via Skype. And Jazmin, talk to me a little bit about any stories that you hear from folks who are coming in, some of maybe the clients that you've worked with. I know there's probably some confidentiality. You can't tell us all the details, but what's the majority of cases for you that you're dealing with? Is it mostly about these businesses and business owners, or just employees?
Yeah, no, Scott. So under some of the work that we do here is also focused on wage theft, and I help a little bit in those cases because the business owners that we help are individuals who want to contribute to the economy, and we don't want them perpetuating hostile work environments.
Okay.
But the majority of the cases that I take are specifically with immigrants, families that are starting a business, already have a business and want to grow their business, if they have tax issues, and helping them navigate those systems. And so I think one of the most common things that I see is, to give you an example, I had a client who had a work permit at one point, and it expired, and under the current administration he couldn't renew. And for the longest time he had a dream of opening a business, his own restaurant, and he didn't have the resources. Luckily, because we partner with the New Mexico Dream Team, his daughter was involved in organizing with the group. He came to me, and we helped him set up his business. We helped him get the appropriate licenses, and I represented him before a couple of hearings because there was a question as to whether he could get his beer and wine license for his business. And the state was adamant that they could not grant him that license because he didn't have a work permit. But nowhere in the statute was it mentioned that he needed a work permit in order to get it. So it's things like that where we're not only having to educate our clients, but we're also having to educate other agencies and other attorneys within those agencies to explain how immigration law is separate from a certain license. And so we're currently working on some policy, hopefully trying to introduce some bills so that can become more clear, and we're trying to model it off of California's laws.
Interesting. It sounds like to me that you kind of have to prove it and then prove it again for your clients sometimes.
Which is why we're trying to create systemic change, right? Because individual service providing can only help the one individual before us. And if we get enough of these stories and we can present this in our state, then we can pass systemic law that once, right, we're like, this is actually happening, this is a solution, then hopefully the idea is that this is a model that can be replicated and maybe not need an attorney for every individual immigrant business owner who is trying to start a business.
And do you think there's hope of doing that at the state level, even if there's no change at the federal level?
Definitely. So one of the things that I'm really grateful about New Mexico is how many people recognize that the immigrant population contributes to our economy. And I'm sure you know, in 2005, our legislature passed a bill that allows students, regardless of immigration status, to go on to college. And so because of that, now we're also working on a bill that allows professional licensing regardless of immigration status, now that we have these students graduating from professional school and occupational school. And then the next goal would be to pass something about commercial licensing.
I see.
I think we have a really good shot.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good. And we just have a few minutes remaining this morning, Jazmin. So what's the biggest misconception that I guess the folks that you encounter have about your clients and about the immigration issue in New Mexico, whether these folks are documented or undocumented? What's the biggest misconception that you run into?
I can give you two that are related.
Okay.
One is that people don't become citizens because they don't want to pay taxes. And two is that immigrants are living off of the government when in fact they're actually revitalizing the current state that they live in, but also the communities that they're living in, whether it's through entrepreneurship or their spending power.
Right. Interesting. And that's pretty documented, I would think, right?
Yeah, it is, and I can send you this information afterwards. It's really cool to look at because this is information that people don't see because it's not portrayed in the media.
Sure. Well, and again, hopefully we're shining a little bit of a light on it this morning because of you, and I appreciate your time of being here, but I know it's a very complicated issue, and so there really isn't an easy answer, and I understand that as well for all of our viewers and listeners this morning. But at least we've started the conversation. So, Jazmin, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Scott.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here. That is Jazmin Jirazoqui-Ruiz, again from the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, my guest here on KSJE. And I'll be back with more in just a moment, everyone.
Hey kids!